Welcome. This is a presentation on the Prescriptive Earthquake Home Retrofit Program. It's also known as Project Impact. That is based on original Project Impact system that we did after earthquakes in Northern California, and the drawings were developed and brought up to Washington, and especially after the Nisqually quake. I've introduced myself. My name is Dean Greenleaf, and I'm being assisted by the fantastic Kristen Malik. If you have any difficulty hearing me or understanding what I'm saying, please let me know. Closed captioning is available, and also Kristen will be monitoring the chat. Okay. In general, you'll be muted, but you're welcome to unmute yourself. And I also encourage people to use the raise your hand feature, but more on that in a minute. So SDCI, or the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspection, is a pretty great place to work, mostly because I really believe in building safe, and I have a construction background and love the building trades, but also it's a place where we have values like you see here. The team that I've had working with for the last 15 years, we've developed the following of equity, respect, service, quality, and integrity. And this has actually been modernized a little bit further. But I just like the idea of helping people build a safe, livable, and inclusive Seattle. So the idea here is to help you understand a little bit more about the project impact, or the prescriptive home retrofit program. To understand what the Project Impact Program is and where it applies. We can go over the homes that qualify and how to use the prescriptive plan sets that are available free on our website and at other jurisdictions around us, and become familiar with some of the resources that we have and that we offer. Please feel free to type your questions into the presentation chat, or to raise your hand if you have questions or comments. The raise your hand is a feature that is in the lower right next to the little smiley face there, and it's kind of a raise hand option for you. For example, please raise your hands if you were in Seattle when the Nisqually earthquake hit. This was in that looks like I've got the thing there, February 28th, 2001. And let me see if I can see who all is raising their hands up. I cannot.
I have access to everyone who has their hands raised. It looks like majority of our
All right.
attendees have their hand raised.
Yeah, great. So looks like Dean, Randy, Dean Edmondson, where were you at when the Nisqually earthquake happened? How about you, Randy? Can you unmute yourself? No?
Oh, Randy says Queen Anne in the chat.
Wow, a lot of older houses in Queen Anne. I'm kind of glad to hear that people were not in Pioneer Square. That's probably a good idea. Is there anybody else wants to try to unmute and say where they were during the Nisqually quake?
I was in one of the high-rise office buildings downtown.
Oh dear, is that Jim Thomas?
Yes,
Wow, what floor were you on, Jim?
the 30th floor.
Did it feel like a bigger shake because you were higher up off the ground?
My mind was saying these buildings are engineered to absorb this force.
Yep.
But the rest of me was absolutely petrified.
Yeah, there is a fight or flee, isn't there, with that? But you're exactly right. Actually, high-rise buildings are pretty safe to be in earthquakes. I wouldn't recommend being just outside of one. Is a problem with falling debris, but that was also the deal and an issue with Pioneer Square. the buildings themselves had damage, but it was the parapets and some of the brick facades that fell that really caused damage, and were very dangerous to anybody standing underneath them. Great, thank you. Thank you for raising your hands. And
We have Arlene in the chat was
yeah.
in Magnolia in a
Oh,
3-story wood framed condo.
oh wow. Okay. A lot of creaking, I bet, with that. Great. Thank you.
Shaking, she says, they say.
Shaking. Yeah, that makes sense. And okay.
I was in a old house on the Greenwood neighborhood. I didn't
Okay.
realize how dangerous it was because it has those wood frame walls sitting on top of the foundation.
Right. And what we'll see here too, one of the great things about Project Impact is it's looking to mitigate. It doesn't make your home earthquake proof, but it's looking to mitigate some of that damage that happens where houses are basically shaken off of their foundations. So great. All right. Let me see if I can get back to here. All right. So first off, be prepared. During the Nisqually earthquake, you want to, it is not the best time to figure out if you have some type of home preparedness kit or don't have a route out or an escape plan. Um, and so we'll talk a little bit about how to keep yourself safe as well as how to prepare your building. Going to talk a little bit about building safety and the history of Project Impact today, and then what the purpose of the program is, and then what we need. And I'll come back to this repeatedly, but in a nutshell, the project impact and prescriptive method is to anchor the house to the foundation, brace the house against lateral movement, and to connect the wood framing, that first floor wood framing, to the foundation and to the what we call a pony wall or the framed wall below the first floor, between the first floor and the foundation. We'll talk a little bit about how to apply and resources that are available. Most of that information, in fact, all of that information is available on our website as well. So I think everybody's aware that we are in an area that does have earthquakes, and we're in what's called the Cascadia earthquake zone, and there are several fault lines that run right through Seattle. So public safety, take care of yourself. And they used to say, was it drop? What is it? Stop, drop, and cover. Now it's drop, cover, and hold. If you can't get underneath a table or get beside a couch, something like that, you want to think kind of beneath, beside, or between in the case of a seismic event. Old groups used to say, go to a doorway or go to strong framing. Actually, you probably want to stay out of the doorway if it's an egress route and people are going to be rushing through there, and doors will sometimes jam or rack during an earthquake. So when you were downtown, for example, in the building's fine. Find something so that you're not going to get if something falls or if a shelf tips over, stuff like that. So the idea of the project impact and the prescriptive home retrofits is to promote public safety. We want to improve resistance, like the example here. This is from the 1994 California earthquake. The good thing about what Seattle's doing and what several other jurisdictions do is that they actually make this process a little bit simpler. They try to simplify the retrofitting or the earthquake prescriptive retrofitting process, and we offer this as one of several methods to retrofit your home. The nice thing about the retrofitting process, while it won't earthquake proof your house, it is something you can do with a fairly simple set of drawings that are free, doesn't require an engineer, and it also does not require an intake appointment. A little bit of background on the project impact. Started after the earthquake that messed up the house on the previous slide, mid 90s, 1994 Northridge earthquake. Other jurisdictions use a group called mybuildingpermit.com as their online service, but since the pandemic, most jurisdictions are now doing digital applications. The Washington Association of Building Officials, and what I'll call WABO, is they've paid money and they hired a committee to update the FEMA drawings and to make them simpler and more applicable to what we're doing in the Seattle area and the specific seismic category of Seattle and of Washington State. So it's the FEMA drawings are the first time we've updated the project impact drawings in a while, and we're really excited to be able to use the same set of drawings throughout the region here, making it more consistent. So project impact in the drawings focus on where the seismic energies are the greatest. It is, and I'll mention this several times, prescriptive. It is a retrofit, meaning it's meant to be used on an existing structure. New construction will need to meet current building codes. Um, but where the arrow is biggest is kind of where this is focused. There are other options for more homes if you don't qualify, including we have an engineered solution that can be done as a subject to field inspection permit. But project impact is focused from the first floor down, connecting that first floor wood framing to the foundation. So where those two big left and right arrows are, that's where we tend to work. Are there any questions so far?
No questions in the chat, but I did add our link to how you apply for a permit in the chat.
Great. Great.
Is this
Thank you very much.
mandatory?
Mandatory. I believe that was from Mr. Miller. Mandatory compliance only comes into play if it is required by the residential code, and seismic retrofits to existing homes are required when there is a substantial alteration to the home. More information on what a substantial alteration is on our website in one of our tips, and also chapter 1 of the Seattle residential code. But if you're doing alterations that impact the guts and the large portion of the house, often they will also require the connection from the house to the foundation to be improved, at least to meet the prescriptive requirements. Good question.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Go back to here. So here are some examples of what you want your house not to look like. So the house on the left there, that's from the Association of Building Officials, and it's fairly simple, but you'll notice the house itself does not have a whole lot of damage, but it has been rocked off of its foundation. The photo with the blue house there, the 1994 California earthquake, we've got 2 tags on the building. The windows actually are still intact, but the plumbing, electrical, and sewer line for this building all were sheared off. So it has been red tagged as being unlivable because it is off of the foundation. Bring this up. Pardon me while I rearrange my windows here. There we go. So the project impact is focused on the foundation, the connection from the foundation and the home's first floor framing, and the bracing of that first or short wall between the foundation and the first floor. This short wall is called a pony wall or a cripple wall, and it is what they use for structural bracing. A pony wall is typically a non-structural wall, but they are kind of they're interchangeable. A cripple wall is a wall that is not full height. Some people will call them knee walls because you bump your knee into them or they're knee height, but that's usually in an attic. So as you're looking for language, you're looking at first floor framing, cripple wall or pony wall, and the foundation. To the right is an example there. That foundation has, the house is shifted. Foundation literally is, what, a couple feet to the right there. If the house was built after the late 70s or early 80s, chances are pretty good it already has anchor bolts and it already has some type of foundation connection and bracing. If your home could be considered a craftsman or mid-century modern, you may need a retrofit. King County Records has pretty good idea on when the house was built, and you can also do research through permitting history from us or through the microfilm or through King County assessors. Right. So, um, real quick question there. Let me see if I can go back one actually. So, does anybody know where the Hiram Burnett house is? It's built in 1865, and the real hint is what's behind it. Anybody have an answer in the chat?
No chat answers yet.
Mm-hmm. So the Hiram Burnett house is actually, well, there's a parking lot there now, but that is actually the corner of, let me see here, I'll get it right. It is the corner of 4th and Columbia.
We just got someone ask Cascade neighborhood.
Yeah, this is actually downtown Seattle. Behind it, you can see the First Methodist Church. And just to the left is what became what we know now as the Rainier Club building. Um, and this is an area of downtown about a block away from where I work. The house on the right is what we call a skinny house. It is in an area of Ballard where the lots are 25 feet wide, and so the house being 5 feet from either property line is 15 feet. But it has a full foundation and pony wall. As you can see there, it's got good connections to the foundation. When I say mid-century modern, I mean something along the lines of a gray house there, which is fantastic. Also Craftsman, which is the 4231, the yellow and white house. Both of those are older houses that may not have a strong connection to the foundation. And that's something that you would look at either through the crawl space or through the basement. So a floor plan would be a two-dimensional representation of this space as a three-dimensional space. But the work here, this is shown as a crawl space. The work is done on the exterior walls. And what happens is there are anchors or expansion anchors there put into the foundation. The cripple wall there is braced, usually with plywood placed on the inside, but it can be on both sides. And if the expansion anchors cannot be put in, or if there is a sill that goes right up to the first floor framing, they will put steel anchor plates on the side. So this kind of gives you an idea of the area where the foundation work is being done. So the following characteristics are kind of what's important. Basement or crawl space. Is it 1 or 2 stories? And how big is it? How big a house is it? And then the other one is what type of wall and roof finishes do you have? Brick walls or tile roofs can make the house heavier, which makes it react in a stronger or has a higher seismic weight and a higher reaction to earthquakes. So back to those ABCs, the anchor to the foundation, brace below the first floor, and then connect to that first floor framing. These are all examples, some of them from Simpson, which is a manufacturer of the anchor bolts, clips, and they have a great website for what type of information can help with that or how to install them. But so on the foundation, on the left there, you have the foundation bolting, and then the braced wall panels with ventilation holes in them, and then clips for the clips to that first floor framing.
Hey, Dean, we have a few questions in the chat
Great.
when you're done with the slide.
Yeah, this is
Um,
good.
Arlene asked, and I think Arlene's question was about the slide prior to this. What about
hmm
the column? What about the column to beam in the right of the diaphragm?
hmm the columns that are in the middle of the posts there. So what's interesting about Project Impact is the calculations were done using the perimeter of the building, the outside walls, and it was done assuming a certain percentage or a certain amount of braced wall line and anchor bolts all around the perimeter of the building. It does not go into bracing the interior posts or walls of a building. So I would highly recommend putting a connection to that footing and a connection to the post from the post to the beam, but that is not something that is required by Project Impact. It is similar for chimneys. Unreinforced masonry chimneys can be a real hazard in the event of an earthquake, especially if they're on the side of a building or if they fall into the building and will go right through the roof. However, that is not something that is retrofitted as part of this plan set. FEMA has additional information for garages, for chimneys, and how to connect or provide what they call a positive connection to everything that's helping to support the house. But for Project Impact, they limited the prescriptive requirements to the exterior walls and exterior foundation of the building. Thank you for the question. Excellent.
And we had one more question, which I think is similar. Michael
Mhm.
asked, does the prescriptive path also require you to have unconnected columns bolted together?
Unconnected columns is like the one that's right in the front there, just sitting on the ground, is not part of the prescriptive plan set or improvements, but is typically would be something of new construction, definitely. We would recommend improving them, but for Project Impact, they focus specifically on the outside exterior wall.
Great. And
Yeah.
that's all we have for now.
Great. The other thing is a prescriptive earthquake retrofit. The stiffening, the bracing, and the anchoring stops at the first floor. So a new construction, you would need to have a lateral load path all the way from from the top of the ridge of the roof down through the attic, down through the upper floor, down through the main floor, and down through the foundation into the ground. The idea is both wind factors and earthquake would affect all of the floors. It would be strongest where the building meets the ground. Prescriptive home retrofit, the plan set itself is conservative, but it also only deals with the connection to the first floor and beneath the first floor framing. So the new prescriptive plan set goes up to the first wood framed floor. So a cripple wall could actually be up to 7 feet tall and still be underneath that first floor framing. So we've seen cases where the first floor of the building, which is partially a foundation and partially a wood framed wall, would actually be considered all part of this prescriptive beneath that first wood floor framing. Good question.
Great. I think we're all caught up with the chat for now.
Okay, thank you. I've lost my ability to see it for some reason, and I'm hesitant to unshare and share again just because it's working so well so far. So
That's okay. We'll
if
keep
you,
going.
okay, if you have questions, you can either put them in the chat or you can unmute and just say, hey, I have a question. I'd be happy to stop. Okay,
Great.
all right. Um, so the complete plan set is a complete package. It is a portable document format, a PDF, and there are about 15 or 16 pages of actual plans, couple pages of instructions, and then at the end, there's actually 2 or 3 pages of examples that can be used, and those are really helpful when you're trying to fill it out. The cover sheet is one of the key plans that we're going to look at. It also gives you the yes or no questions and whether or not you qualify. And we'll go over each one of those. That's probably one of the major things is, can I use this plan set? So the first sheet, sheet S0, will actually discuss that and give you the qualifying features. The foundation and layout retrofits plans we'll discuss briefly, and then the retrofit schedule sheets, and then the examples if we have any time left here. But we'll focus mostly on the first, do you qualify? And if so, kind of the basic idea of how to set up a floor plan. So qualifying projects need to basically answer yes to every one of the questions that is on this page. If the answer is no or non-compliant, as the plan set asks you to state, then this could be an issue. Now, if you are non-compliant with any one of the items on the right, it may still be possible, but I would recommend talking with a person through our virtual applicant services center, or hiring a professional to get an answer on it. The other thing, and this isn't something I mentioned before, the Office of Emergency Management actually offers classes on this periodically. They use a similar plan set and presentation to what I'm doing right now. And they offer classes both at the homeowner and contractor level. So they can be helpful as well.
Dean, we just had,
Yeah.
we had one person, Justin asked what is the main difference between the new and the previous plan set? I'm not sure if we're getting, if we're going to those.
That's a really good question. So the previous plan set required a percentage of exterior walls to be braced, starting with about 30% or 25% of each exterior wall, the north, south, east, and west side. The older prescriptive set also was limited to pony or cripple walls that were 48 inches or less in height. So the new plan set has a maximum that you need for percentage of wall, which we worked very hard to get in there, but it is based on the number or the length of 2 wall panels. So what I'll discuss in the difference between the two is the new plan set says you need to have so many lineal feet or a length of braced wall panel versus a percentage of the total wall. The new plan set also will allow a pony wall to be taller, and is no longer limited to that 4 feet. In fact, anything 7 feet or less can be counted as a pony wall. It was adapted from the FEMA drawings that are for crawl space dwellings, and we've used the crawl spaces anything that has a cripple wall of 7 feet or less versus 4. So in some ways, it's a little bit more conservative because of that. And for smaller houses, providing the length of the minimum lengths that they require can be more difficult, but there are some ways to work with that. And for medium and for a larger amount of the housing stock in Seattle, as an average house, this is actually looking to be a little bit easier to do. Good question.
And we have one more. It might be
Sure.
a little too project specific for right now, but
Yeah.
Emma asked, she says, my house was built in 1906. Most
Uh-huh.
of the foundation has been replaced with concrete, but
Hmm.
there's about 10 foot of stacked brick. Would this be a no to answer question number 4? The stacked brick area is about 4 feet high.
So it really depends if the stacked brick area is over about 4 feet wide or 5 feet wide, or if it takes up a significant side of the exterior of the building, that would be a problem. The idea with the prescriptive plan set is it assumes that it has a continuous perimeter foundation, and stacked brick just doesn't qualify for that. Good question.
Great.
That would be a good example. In fact, thank you very much for that. It would be a good example of that is an iffy answer. So I would recommend talking to a permit specialist or a permit process leader through the virtual applicant services center, saying, hey, is this something that I can still do with this specific prescriptive home retrofit, or is this something where I'm going to need to have an engineer find a solution for me and possibly do it as a subject to field inspection?
They, Emma followed up as you were speaking, the brick is below grade.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what we're looking at is what is the connection? Is the foundation something that we can anchor into? So, if it's a concrete masonry unit wall, concrete masonry units are also iffy. Some of them are fully reinforced, and that's fine. Other ones are reinforced periodically, and that makes it difficult to use this plan set. It's hard to match that. We have some anchorage here, and it's not a continuous perimeter foundation. It is done in piers. So,
Great.
okay.
And we got one more question on this slide.
Sure.
Amir asked, does 2 stories include ground floor?
2 stories would include everything below the first wood floor framing. So if you have a ground floor that's a couple feet off the ground and is a wood framed floor, that would be considered your first floor. If you have a slab on grade and the first wood framed floor is actually 1 floor above grade, that could still be considered the first floor if you have that 7 foot maximum height above the foundation wall.
Great.
Yeah, good questions.
I
So
think we're
this
all
is
caught up for now.
okay. Thank you, Kristen. So there are 11 questions here, and they're not necessarily, these are all pretty important. Let's go ahead and go through them real quick. The answers to these help determine if you can use this prescriptive retrofit. So here is the Admiral's house, what used to be Fort Lawton in Magnolia. It is a nice house, and let's see if it meets the qualification requirements. So I'm assuming for a couple of things that this is wood framed. They don't have any brick on the outside, and that upper floor is going to be considered an attic space. And if you have questions on whether or not your attic would count as a floor or not, there are a couple of things that can help determine that, but I would recommend contacting us here at the Applicant Services Center. Couple of things that they will ask you about is how big is it compared to the floor below? Is it over, half the size? Is it under half the size of the floor below? And also, does it have a permanent stairway leading up to it? Does it have a permanent floor? Once you get above about half the size of the floor below, when does the weight of that floor become significant enough to need seismic help? So going through the questions here, one or family, is it a 1 or 2 family dwelling, 2 stories in height? Yeah, okay, sure. Crawl space, basement or foundation. This actually does have a basement, but it is on a full concrete foundation. Great. So far, so good. Cripple walls under 7 feet tall. I'm not seeing much of a cripple wall at all, but I'm guessing that the first floor is about 3 steps above grade. There may be some framing, but yeah, definitely less than 7 feet. Is it on a site that has less than 30% slope? There's no steep slope on the site. There's no environmentally critical areas. This actually at Fort Lawton is right there at the top. Yeah, this is a perfectly flat spot. Great. Does it have a lightweight roof, or does it have any type of brick exterior? Or is it a tile roof? That's a regular roof and it looks like a wood framed wall. Great. No brick. So far, so good. And then the last one there is at maximum square footage of 4,000 square feet. Regrettably, with the ballroom, this area is more like 7,300 square feet. That is not including the basement. So this turns out to be a house that is too large to use under using the prescriptive home earthquake retrofits. I'm guessing because it's a historic dwelling, it would also be fairly complex to retrofit, but there would be a couple of options for this. You could hire an architect and have them do a plan, or you could have an engineered detail of a retrofit and do it as a subject to field inspection. All right. So the large part of what the project impact requires is you have to draw a floor plan. Floor plan is a top view down of the crawl space or the basement area of your home. It shows the perimeter walls, foundation, and the pony walls. There are examples on in the plan set, but what we're looking for is the length of the new panels and the size and shape of what's there and what you're going to improve. Okay. Now, when they talk about bracing or bracing the layout for the plans, what we have is the new braced wall panels typically are plywood, and they often will look like this. Here's an example of a pretty short pony wall. The floor joists are running left to right at the top there. We have a double top plate and then a very short pony wall that leads down to a plate that is in contact with the concrete. That's also called the sill plate. Here, the panel on the left there with the hole drilled in it, that is a braced wall panel. If you look closely, you can kind of see how it's nailed off all the way around the perimeter, making that pony wall stiffer so it will transfer the forces and not get torn off of the foundation. This is an example of what they call a universal retrofit plate, I think, which is the bent plate you see on the left and the right. It is held into the concrete with anchor bolts and or mechanical anchor bolts, and then into the sill plate with this one is done with short lag screws that are made to withdraw shear. Other plates can use nails, depending on what's appropriate. If you're going to use an anchor side plate like this, especially if it's Simpson or another brand, they will have specific connections that they require. And it's worth looking at those because regular nails may not quite do what they want them to do. Are there any questions?
There are. We
Great.
have a question from Sarah. And the chat's moving so fast, I'm losing them.
Oh
But
dear.
Sarah asked, oh no, my chat window's a little too small for this. If you have windows in your cripple walls, are there special requirements? What if the windows are wider than the anchor spacing?
So the anchor spacing typically goes beneath the window. That's a very good question. Braced wall panels have a hard time because the window really goes right where the braced wall panel needs to be. So usually for the anchors themselves will go evenly spaced the entire length of the wall. But the braced wall panels will be put in where they can go from that sill plate where these flexible anchor plates are going in all the way up to that double tall plate or the floor framing. So those tend to be shorter in shorter groups. The minimum width that you can have for a braced wall panel is 2 feet, and it has to be the full height from the sill plate up to that floor framing. The idea is it transfers forces from the foundation all the way up to that first floor framing. So while the anchor bolts can help hold the house to the foundation, transferring the forces from the foundation into that first floor, from the first floor back down into the foundation, are done with these panels that would go on either side of the window or would go where the window is not. Another good example is a sliding glass door or a garage door that can get in the way of providing braced wall panel lengths.
Great.
Okay.
We have a process type of question. Justin asked if
Sure.
are CAD drawings an option for permit submittal?
CAD drawings can be used, but we only accept them in the form of I'm not sure what TIFF stands for, but we don't do vector drawings for plan review because they can be manipulated. So we need a fixed PDF or TIFF format in order to review the drawings. But many people, what they do is they'll do the drawings in SketchUp or in AutoCAD or in Autodesk. I forget what the other, there's several. And then eventually they will create a PDF. I've seen a couple plans that were done in Excel and then generated a PDF, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. Does
Great.
that answer your question?
I think that does.
Great.
We've got a few more.
Mm-hmm. Thank
Jim
you. Sure. You're welcome.
Jim asked us, what happens if the height of the cripple wall is less than 2 feet?
Well, if the height of the cripple wall is less than 2 feet, what ends up happening is you start having solid blocking, um, or it becomes more difficult to put in the anchor bolts, and you start using side anchors. But I've seen 18 inches with cripple walls fairly often that are just tall enough to be frameable and to be able to put nails in. So there are some that are fairly short and squat. It is difficult to work in a crawl space, especially if you're drilling at all. That's when side anchor plates like this become very a good option. I'm guessing this is probably a crawl space in the picture that it's showing here. So, yeah, good question.
Great. And we have one more so
Yeah.
far. Aaron asked, they said my house was built in 1930, so it's 93 years old. Are there are there concerns with drilling things into the concrete or into the wood framing due to it potentially damaging the concrete or the wood?
The wood would probably be actually harder than softer woods today. Older woods can dry out and crack, but I have I'm living in a house that's built in early 1900s, and the wood framing down below is actually darker and harder just because the wood has aged, the water has left it, and it is actually shrunk slightly. Also, the framing sometimes is actually a little bit bigger than what the framing is now. You'll see with sharp edges and full 2 inches by 4 inches versus a 2 by 4 now is 1 3/4 inches, um, not 2 inches. So the foundation can be more of an issue if you have voids or spalling, or a foundation that has a lot of air spaces. Drilling into it can be an issue. I've seen contractors use epoxy and other items to help uh, the anchor get proper to get it seated properly so that it will not pull out. But that can be more of an issue. If the foundation is deteriorated or is not in good shape, repairing it or providing grout to fill in those voids may be required in order to provide a good place for the anchors to go. Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. More and more, what coaching happens with stuff like that is contractors will say, "Give me pictures," or they will go down and take pictures and then look around the length. Once you have looked at several houses or houses of that period, they'll also get an idea on if your sill plate was nailed to the foundation, if it was just set into the foundation while it was still wet and just shaken down so that it's half in the foundation and half out, or if there was some type of an anchor put in. Um, it really kind of depends on the house, but yeah, good question.
Thanks again.
Yeah. So I'm going to go into the braced wall length page of the plan set itself. And this, I hope, will give you kind of an idea on the information they're looking for. but this is starting to get into what I do with contractors as far as actually filling out the plan set. So the once you have a floor plan, what they're looking for is um, how many stories is it, and um, what is the building area, and what is the cripple wall height. So this starts to get pretty complex pretty quickly because this represents all three of those. This is a chart for a one-story building in the seismic zone. The SDS is for the Seattle area. The length of each of two braced wall sections required. The original FEMA drawings, the original FEMA drawings had two lengths that needed to be equal, like two 7-foot sections or two 4-foot sections. And WABO has updated this and said we need a total of the equivalent of those rather than two big braced wall panels, partially because of your previous question. If you have a window in the way, or one side is 8 feet or 7 feet, no problem, and the other side is I've got two 3-foot sections, but I have a window in the middle, so stuff like that. So here's an example. Oh, annotate to share. Mr. Edmondson, I am going to decline the annotation request just because I'm thinking it might impact the recording. So here is an example of a single-story house. We've got a 4-foot tall cripple wall, and the building itself is 1,400 square feet. So they would need two braced wall sections of about how long in length. So one thing that's easier to go through too, you'll notice the circular numbered items, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. You can walk through the chart using those. So first one, is it how many stories is it? Item number 2, what is the total area in square feet? We've got 1,400 square feet. And then item number 4 there, what is the cripple wall height? So we've got 4 feet in height, about 1,400 would be between 1,201 and 1,500. We're looking at two braced wall sections of 10.7 feet or 8 feet, depending on if there are tie downs at each end or if it does not have tie downs at each end. So this would require a total of 21.4 feet without tie downs and 16 feet with tie downs. It's a lot to take in, but that's kind of how this chart works. Questions?
None in the chat yet.
I've overwhelmed. Okay, so we can walk through an example of this as well. Once you do it a couple of times, it gets easier, or just take it step by step. Most construction under step 1 will be 1-story light construction. The total square feet is something you can have ahead of time, and you can mark where that is under item number 3. The cripple wall height becomes pretty important, item number 4, and then the length of each braced wall section is number 5. Number 6 and 7, they talk about the number of anchor bolts, and what's nice about this is that is the total number of anchor bolts that need to be spaced along that wall line. So the most important item is the length of the cripple wall or the braced wall panel, and then the number of anchor bolts. For example, if you're using a 1/2 inch and that is a diameter symbol, anchor bolt, that would require 12 anchor bolts along each exterior wall. Okay.
We do have a few questions now,
Sure.
if you're ready for them.
I'm ready.
Emma asked, what does the total equals 2 times the value mean?
So the total, the total equals 2 times value means the total length of braced wall section is twice what is shown in this chart. So, for example, in the green box, if I put tie downs down, I would need 2 braced wall sections of 8 feet each. So the total length of that exterior wall would be the length of those 2 8-foot sections, or 16 feet. Does that help?
I think,
A little bit? Okay.
all right, I think that question is answered. Our next question is from Justin.
Yeah.
So under most conditions, are tie downs optional?
Under most conditions, tie downs are optional. And by a tie down, so if we have an 8-foot braced wall panel, a tie down would be an additional anchor that's larger that's put down on either end. So a tie down is really similar to a hold down that's used that Simpson has, that provides more than just the anchor bolt connection. So
Great.
yeah,
And
what ends up happening is it becomes a balancing act. Do you provide more braced wall panel, or do you provide shorter braced wall panels that have these additional larger anchors at each end of the wall panel? Okay.
okay, and we've got one more from
Sure.
Paul. My house has existing 3/8" anchor bolts at 8 feet on center. Should
Oh,
I
nice.
should I ignore that and install plates and anchors as if they weren't there, or can I reduce the number of required anchors and plates? The house has a simple crawl space, no pony walls, 1-story wood frame.
So 3/8 is an interesting bolt size. What they use now is 1/2 inch or 5/8. And 1/2 inch is kind of the minimum bolt size. So what I might do is so you don't really have much of a braced. Is there a pony wall at all?
No pony wall.
No pony wall. So with just the anchors, then you would need to meet the number of anchors. A 3/8 inch is just under a 1/2 inch. Technically, that wouldn't work with this plan set, but I might talk to somebody and see if you have them I can't remember how many feet on center.
8 feet on center.
Okay, so prescriptive requirements in Chapter 4 and Chapter 6 of the current residential code would require a maximum spacing of about 6 feet on center. So you could probably, I'm not sure this would work for you. I think it might be good to have somebody take a look and see how many anchor bolts that would mean on each side. For a single story home, prescriptively, the current code might require a 1/2 inch every 6 feet or every 4 feet, or a 5/8 diameter, slightly bigger bolt every 6 feet. Having them 8 feet would probably not be quite enough and would need to be supplemented. The easiest solution is probably to find an engineer to do a calculation for you and add an anchor bolt in between, or add 3 along, one to make it so that the spacing is every 4 feet, and then do that as a subject to field inspection if you wanted to. It might be difficult to do the anchor bolts into the plate because you'd have to drill down vertically. Without a pony wall, that can be kind of difficult, but you could also put in a side plate. The side anchor plates and anchor bolts tend to be spaced about the same, so you could do a side anchor plate so many feet and have that work as well. Does that help? Kind of. I can't be more specific really, but if you ignored it and put in all new anchor plates, I guess that would work. It would be very much over designed, but you could also have an engineer give you a solution where you're just adding one plate every other bolt, something like that.
Uh, Paul's response was not sure.
Okay. So I would recommend talking with a person at the Applicant Services Center about that. But the idea of either you're using the 3/8 existing situation and augmenting it, but that would not be something that would be within the scope of the prescriptive retrofit. To clarify, I'm hoping that clarifies a little bit. All right. Are there other questions?
No, that is it. I think we are good to move on. Oh, just kidding. We just got another one as I was wrapping up.
Sure.
Michael says, so side anchor plates are interchangeable with anchor bolts in the chart.
So what happens is um, yes. I'm looking at type D, type E or F, or type G. Um, and I believe those are uh, those are the clips and items that are used to connect to the floor cripple wall to the foundation. But I think type D might be clips, type F might be a side anchor plate. Typically, the side anchor plates are interchangeable um, with each other. So
And maybe just to clarify, this is Michael. Thank you for that.
sure.
In my in my example, I don't have a cripple wall. I have a sill plate sitting directly on a 1906 concrete foundation for a one-story house. So
Okay.
there's no room for the anchor bolts, and I'm mostly just curious, as long as I find the right anchor plate, would I just use the spacing? That's where I'm just a little confused, because depending on the manufacturers, if you get the Stimson strong ties or
Right.
whatever, they say, hey, place them a certain distance and use certain size bolts, but that might be different than this table. So just trying to understand that nuance.
Yeah, and I think that falls under type D, E, F, or G. And what I'm looking at is, for this example, you have a 1/2 inch bolt, you need 12 of them, 5/8 bolt needs 10, and then they say type D is 23, type E or F is 22, and then type G is 29. And I'm not sure exactly what I've seen in the past, and using the older method. What happened is the number of side anchor plates was the same number as the number of 5/8 inch diameter bolts. And I think the answer is here. Um, but when you look at type AB under the first column there, that may be the number of side anchor plates. And I'm sorry, I don't have the complete plan set to give you a clear answer now, but it appears to be roughly the equivalent of the 5/8 inch diameter anchor bolts. So I'm guessing type A/B is the number of anchor plates.
Fair. Thank you.
Sure, that's a really good question, and I wish I had a clear answer on that. Looking at this, I've looked at it a whole bunch of times, but you're exactly right. I need to figure out, I believe type A or type B is a type A flat side anchor plate, or a type B universal side anchor plate, like the bent ones that I showed earlier in the picture. But I need to confirm that, so it's a good question.
Okay, I think
Next
we
slide.
are okay to move on. Yep.
Okay. So there are a couple more slides here. And what I wanted to talk about is the process. Now, we at the Seattle SDCI, we have subject to field inspection permit, prescriptive home retrofit permit, or a full plan review permit. Any one of those is an option if you're doing a retrofit to your home. This is the second option of those. The nice thing about this is you don't need an intake appointment. These can be screened and brought in without scheduling an intake. They use a free standard plan set that you can fill out yourself and provide a floor plan, and you do not need an engineer. These drawings are prescriptive. They're based on standard prescriptive methodologies in the existing building code and in chapter 4 and 6 of the residential code, and they've been over engineered. If anything, the prescriptive is fairly conservative, but you don't need an engineer to do it. Also, the fees for the prescriptive plan set, because the plan review is fairly straightforward and they're limited in the type of houses that work. There aren't a whole lot of outliers for this. The permit fees are based off of a flat 1 hour fee versus the value of the construction, which makes them usually cheaper than a regular full plan review permit or an expensive STFI on a larger house or one that has a higher construction valuation. So the process overview here, it does have plan review. It does go to a building plans examiner here to look to make sure that you meet all of the prescriptive requirements, and then the plans set are clear enough so that a building inspector, when they crawl under the house, can see how many anchor plates, how many anchor bolts, and what type of braced wall panels are needed on each exterior wall. Once the permit is issued, you have inspections. With this, I typically recommend having an inspection early on. You can do what is called a pre-submittal inspection or an advisory inspection as soon as you start work. That sets up a good understanding between you and your building inspector on what's expected, what they're going to be looking for. These can often be resolved with a couple inspections, one usually at the beginning or before you cover up the anchor bolts with insulation or anything else, and one at the end of the project. So just to summarize here, these are part of what Seattle is doing and the Office of Emergency Management encourages us to do to build a more disaster resistant community. We are anchoring the foundation, bracing that cripple wall, and connecting to that first floor framing, providing better resistance where earthquake forces are the greatest. Existing wood framed homes, couple stories in height. They can have a crawl space or a daylight basement or a pony wall up to about 7 feet tall. And we're looking to kind of simplify the permit process with this and provide a prescriptive plan set that's used throughout the Northwest region. So I'm going to go one more slide, and that is these are resources. These are really handy places to start looking, and it also gives us specific to our website and permits we issue A to Z, and we are under E for earthquake permit. So that's pretty much it. I have one more with my contact information, but that is the overview for Project Impact, the prescriptive earthquake home retrofits. I've gone a little bit long, but I'm open to any questions that you might have.
We have just one in the chat right now from
Sure.
Justin, and they want to know if there are any changes with the permitting process from the previous plan set.
None.
No.
The process that SDCI is using is the same as it was before. We have gone electronic, but we did that shortly before the pandemic hit. We were pretty lucky to be fully digital before then. And so you don't submit paper drawings. You do need to set up an account in the project portal. And with these, you set up a preliminary application. preliminary applications require you to have at least a preliminary site plan, even though you're not doing work to the exterior of the house. This is more to make sure that the permit is issued for the right location and that there is in fact a development site established at that address. Um, so making sure it's basically a buildable site, it's one that we have in our history, we know what's there, and we issue a permit for the right location. Once you have a preliminary application started, you can submit the drawings and hit submittal complete, or you're ready for screening, and they will screen it just like they would for what we call a subject to field inspection permit. Instead of issuing the permit, they would bring it in, charge the minimum fee, and route it to a building plans examiner to look at to make sure that it meets the minimum prescriptive requirements.
Great.
That's a lot to take in.
That was Paul. It looks like you were mid-typing
Ah,
a question, but didn't. I'm not sure if that was finished. You just said permit process with a colon. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that? No. Okay. Paul's question was resolved, but we do have another question from Sarah. How much do contractors usually charge for this work? For example, on a 1,000 square foot house.
that's a really good question. There is a list of contractors that WABO has, but for what we've seen, I keep track of the square footages typically that is done under the project impact, and the valuations vary widely depending on what they're doing. I would say probably the biggest impact is whether or not they're working in an existing basement or if they're bracing a pony wall, because that can be intensive. If all they're doing is anchor bolts, then the cost for it uh, are fairly inexpensive for construction. But I can't really give a clear idea. I've seen construction valuations of anywhere between 3 and 10 grand, depending, 5 and 15, depending on if they're doing refinishing and stuff like that. But I'm not sure what the contractor is himself is or herself is charging for that. But that would give you an idea on what they're estimating the total construction cost is.
Great. Arlene just asked, will this help with our annual insurance fee? Should this be shared with the insurance company?
Good question, and I'm glad you bring it up because it used to have more of an impact, no pun intended, as it than it does now. The earthquake insurance or earthquake home insurance will require, or sometimes does give you a benefit if you have a retrofit permit from a jurisdiction like Seattle, but I'm not sure how much or what, and that depends on the insurance agency. Usually we focus on making the house safer is the focus, but there may be financial benefits for you. You'd have to check with your insurance agency.
Great. We have another question from Langdon. What is the consequence of doing earthquake retrofitting without a permit?
Well, if it's done badly or if it's done only on one wall, it may create a situation where forces are actually increased on the opposite wall or on the adjacent wall, making it more susceptible to earthquakes rather than less. Um, the reason that we have a prescriptive retrofit is not only do we not want to do any harm to the building, but we want to make the retrofit even so that we don't end up creating a situation where we're concentrating forcing and creating a twisting or creating some type of a magnification of forces at one point of the building that would make it actually worse in an earthquake. That's a good question.
We have Arlene. If you can only anchor 50% of the building, is it worth it? This might be similar answer to what you just said.
Well, and there's a portion of the prescriptive home retrofits that is about half of the wall. If you brace at least about half of every exterior wall, you're still making it better than it was. There are limitations to what will qualify as a part of the earthquake home retrofit, the prescriptive plan set. But I've seen situations where people are doing an earthquake home retrofit and they submit plans where they're doing 40% or 60% of each wall. And while it may not meet the prescriptive plan set, it is an improvement that we allow. It may require either plan review, or there is a portion in the plans that allows as long as you meet a minimum percentage of each exterior wall, then you can do that. I believe it might be higher than 40%. I think it might be 50. But if 40% of each wall, then it's worth at least starting taking a look at the prescriptive plan set, because that might still qualify. Those are especially true with smaller houses. If you have a 20-foot wall and they're asking for 16 feet of braced wall panel, and you're able to provide 10, that's 50% of that wall, that might still qualify. Good question.
Okay, great. Justin has a large garage door opening about 6 feet in the foundation immediately adjacent to the corner of the foundation. Does this disqualify the project from this prescriptive plan?
So the project impact used to give you about a 10-foot allowance for garage door openers when determining the percentage of walls. And what this does is this requires you to have a total length of braced wall panels, and they don't care where they are. So if you have a 30-foot or 25-foot long wall line, and the first 6 feet right at that corner where it would be really useful to have a braced wall panel is a garage door, you can still provide more bracing along the other portion of that wall and meet the prescriptive requirements. So it is possible to have a large gap if the wall is big enough to still accommodate enough braced wall panels to meet the minimum as required by this code, or this plan set, sorry. You can see how often I say building code.
All right, great.
So I really appreciate you being part of this. It is being recorded and will be available on our website. There will be a survey as soon as you leave the meeting that they will send to you, asking for feedback, which really helps us and will help us provide a better presentation next year. And we could always use improvement. But as we end up here, if you have any other questions or any building code questions, I would also recommend, if you want to see us in person, we are having an in-person home fair. I believe that is in February 25th.
Yes, Dean, that's correct.
Thank you. Ooh, I'm been talking too long. So we will be in person in South Seattle along Martin Luther King there at the Filipino Cultural Center. That is a Q&A. There will be all kinds of people there to answer questions. I would highly recommend, I'll be there if you have further questions about seismic retrofits, or if you want to talk about landslides or anything like that. It will be in person, and would love to see you there. Kristen, I know I'm forgetting something.
I think we are okay. You mentioned the survey that they will all receive when they leave the meeting.
Yes. Yeah. So there were a couple of questions there. One from Sarah. Are there other earthquake retrofitting measures beyond the foundation anchorage that we would recommend? I can make recommendations, but what I would probably look at is I would guide you to a couple of our tips or technical information publications. Tip 303 or 303A will give you some standard connections. But my response to you, Sarah, is when in doubt, provide a positive connection to the foundation or footing and a positive connection to the beam or the joist. And by that, I mean a connection that works in both directions. Don't just put a nail in, put something that not only holds the post to the framing, but holds the framing to the post. Clips, saddles, caps, stuff like that. But very good question. And then you were asking, Arlene was asking for a ledger bolted to the to a deck is anchored to the building. This is actually a really good question, Arlene, because decks are not part of the seismic retrofit, nor are they included in the square footage of the house. So it is only the interior space out to that exterior wall. So you may have a deck that could definitely add torsion or add forces to that, but it is not something that's covered under the prescriptive retrofit. Good question. I think that about covers it. Thank you again so much for coming, and I hope to see you there at the in-person Q&A in the home fair on the 25th.